Welcome back to the For Cultural Purposes podcast. I'm your host, Sean. First, let me start by saying thank you. If this is your first time watching, I would highly recommend checking out the previous episodes. Not just because I want the views, which I'll be honest, I do, but like any good show, if you simply wait and tune in to the season finale, I think you'll miss the impact and you won't appreciate the payoff. However, if you're someone who's been here with me through this entire journey, I want to especially thank you. When I started putting this podcast together several months ago, I was just trying to get my creativity out. At the time, I wasn't working, and I believed that a creative outlet would keep me from bouncing off the walls. Through this process, I've had conversations and learned so much about not just myself, but so much about how others look at the world. I've had an amazing time sharing my worldview with all of you, and I truly hope this season finale is the payoff you've been waiting for. If you've been on this journey with me, you have probably heard me mention at some point about losing my sons. I didn't want to start this podcast off by talking about that story because I felt as though it needed to be earned. First, by me sharing my worldview and how I see things, so that when I decided to tell this part of the story, it wasn't like I was sympathy farming. I didn't want to pass myself off as an expert or an influencer simply because I'm someone with trauma. I don't think that's a good enough reason. However, I also wanted you as the viewer to earn it by watching the full story unfold. I always knew the final episode would include this story. I just wasn't sure how we'd arrive here. With that being said, I've said before that losing my sons undisneyified this world for me. But what I haven't really done is walk you through how it happened. I was 20, working 2 jobs, living in an apartment I could barely afford, doing everything right, or at least everything I've been told a man is supposed to do. I had proposed. We had a home. We were trying to build something stable in a life that was not giving us a lot of stability to work with. Then the twins came, 3 months premature. My first son, Devon, lived 2 or 3 days before complications took him. His brother Makai went through a surgery that was supposed to save him from the same fate, and that surgery is what killed him. For the next 5 or 6 months, we were in and out of the NICU signing DNRs. DNR stands for Do Not Resuscitate. I'll let you figure it out. We were hoping for the best and preparing for the worst, trying to understand the possible choices while still being kids ourselves. Eventually, the NICU staff sat us down and told us the truth plainly. Don't be fooled by how cute he looks. He will never have a normal life. He will need care every moment of his life, and he may not outlive you. If he does outlive you, you will need to have care planned for him, or know that you have left him to be a ward of the state potentially. I couldn't argue with that. Not at 20. Not when I was barely keeping my lights on. Not when I knew love wasn't enough to give him the life he deserved. So we made the hardest choice I've ever had to make. We decided to pull the plug. I stood there as his mother held him, and even after the machines were disconnected, he fought for minutes that felt like hours, until eventually it was over. We cremated him and put him in the same urn as his brother, Devon and Makai, 2 boys who never got the chance to grow up, but changed the trajectory of my entire life. My sons would have been old enough to have a stiff drink with me this year, and I need you to sit with that for a second. Not for sympathy, but because this is the moment my life and this podcast really started. Their deaths undid the Disney version of life I had been sold, the one where if you do everything right, the universe rewards you. Losing them is how I learned the truth. You can do everything right and still lose. You can be responsible, loving, committed, and still get an outcome that breaks you. And what you do with that truth is everything. That's what this whole season has been about. And in this final episode, I want to pull all of it together. The odds of being here, the ladders we climb and pull up, the ripples we cause, the costs we eventually have to pay, and the way we treat reality like a subscription we can cancel whenever it gets uncomfortable. This is the season finale. Let's get into it. I want to ask you a question, and before I do, I want you to consider it. So I'm going to ask it, and then I want you to pause for a second and just really think about what I asked. How many times have you had sex and no child was born? Really consider that. How many times? Now multiply that by everyone you've ever slept with. Multiply that by the people they've slept with. Multiply that by the 8 billion people on this planet. Most of them having sex way more often than they're having kids. When you really zoom out, the odds of any one specific person being born, you specifically being born, is absurd. Someone was kind enough to do the math and they put it at 1 in 400 trillion. That's a 4 followed by 14 zeros. Now I can understand processing that number would be hard, so I'll give you a simplified way to think of it. You are more likely to win the lottery 100 times in a row while simultaneously being struck by lightning every time you win than you are to be born. And that's just conception. Then you factor in everything you have to survive after that: childhood, accidents, illness, racism, poverty, war, bad decisions, other people's bad decisions. I'm 41. I have friends who didn't make it to 25. Excuse me. I had friends that didn't make it to 25. Friends who didn't make it to 18. So when I say the odds of being here are wild, I don't mean it as a cute Instagram affirmation. I mean statistically, structurally, brutally, you were never guaranteed. And that math lives in my chest every time I think about Devon and Mackay. Because I did everything I was supposed to do. I proposed, we had a home. I was working myself to the bone. I didn't lose my sons because I was irresponsible. I lost them because sometimes life just doesn't care what you planned. Sometimes the odds don't break your way. And that's where I want to bring in something I promised a friend I would define: malice. I'm a big fan of sports talk radio. Michael Kay, the Yankees broadcaster, loves to reference a quote from Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart in a case that was about hardcore porn. Get your minds out of the gutter. I'm only going to take this so far. When asked to define hardcore porn, he said, "I cannot define it for you, but I know it when I see it." That's how a lot of us treat malice. We know it when we feel it, but we're not great at saying what it is. Here's how I think about it. Malice isn't just harm. Life hands out harm all the time with no evil intent behind it. To me, malice is what happens when you see someone's humanity clearly, you understand the stakes, and you have other options you could choose. And you still choose the action that shrinks their life because it's easier for you. By that definition, the doctors and nurses in the NICU were not malicious. They didn't lie to us. They didn't sell us false hope to keep the machines running. They told us the truth as plainly and gently as they could, even though it made the room heavier. They were trying to expand our options, not close them. And when we finally decided to let Mackay go, we weren't being malicious either. We were kids making the best choices we could, with the information we had, in a system that gave us no good options at all. Painful outcomes are not automatically proof of malice. But this country, this moment we're living in, is full of choices that do fit that definition. People in power who know better, have other options, see the stakes, and still choose the path that shrinks someone else's life. We'll get there. But before we talk about those choices, we need to talk about ladders. Because once you understand how likely it is to even be here, you have to ask, what are we doing with the chance we got? A few weeks ago, I shared a conversation in Florence that I had with my friend Delano Owens. Get well soon, man. We touched briefly on a metaphor I thought of recently around people climbing the ladder of success. Very often, when we talk about the ladder of success, we talk about it from a standpoint of people powerful enough to pull the ladder up. I'm of the belief that most of us are never powerful enough to pull ladders up. Most of us are in a position where we can steady the ladder for someone climbing behind us. We like to tell a story in this country that everybody climbed the same ladder, same height, same floor, same shoes, same start. That's just not true. Most of us didn't build the ladder we're on. Somebody else did that paperwork. Somebody else negotiated that union contract. Somebody else fought for that pension, that benefit, that civil service rule. Our whole lives have been shaped by ladders we did not design. I've been thinking a lot about when I was a 19-year-old working my first on-the-books job at H&M. A white woman came in one day with a receipt that was over a year old, trying to do a return. When I told her we couldn't honor it, she called me everything but my mother's son. Loud, disrespectful, right on the sales floor. My manager, whose name I won't give, stood there the whole time. Eventually she turned to me and said, "Shaun, just go to the back for a minute. I'll take care of it." So I did. I went to the back. But you know what never happened? She never came to talk to me about it after. Never said, "Hey, I saw what she did and that wasn't okay." Never said, "I've got your back." Never said, "Here's what I told her." Nothing. And I remember thinking right there at 19, if I ever become a manager, I want to be the manager I didn't have that day. That was the first time I realized leadership is also a ladder. You can use it to climb away from people, or to hold a ladder steady while they climb behind you. Now zoom out. I want you to think of former Senator and current Secretary of State Marco Rubio. His family left Cuba and came to the United States. They came into a country that had built a very specific ladder for them. Policies that made it easier for them to get status than, say, Haitians or Mexicans or folks from anywhere else in the Caribbean, like St. Vincent where my family's from, or even Latin America. That wasn't by accident. That was politics. That was the Cuban Adjustment Act. That was America saying, Cuban immigrants help our propaganda against Cuba. Let's make it easier for them to come to America. Rubio's entire American story sits on that ladder, and now he's one of the loudest voices trying to pull ladders up for other immigrants, for asylum seekers, for people running from violence and chaos, just like his family did. That's what I call the infinity ladder in action. It's not just Rubio, though. I've got friends who work for the city, MTA, sanitation, Con Edison. One is out here at 3 a.m. plowing snow off the streets while you sleep. Another is in 100-degree tunnels in the summer, damn near on the edge of a heat stroke, fixing a signal so trains don't crash, while people on the surface are complaining that their line is running local for the weekend. Another is out there fixing power lines in a storm, so you can charge your phone and argue on the internet. Most of them got their jobs in the sweet spot in our early 20s, when a bunch of older workers were retiring. This city was still hiring aggressively, and the cost of living hadn't completely detached from reality yet. They studied for the civil service tests. They showed up. They did the work. But they also caught a window of time where the ladder was down and someone was holding it. And now a lot of them don't think about the fact that they are on the very same ladder. When they vote or don't vote, when they shrug at elections, when they roll their eyes at younger folks complaining about rent or debt, they don't always connect that their pension, their union contract, their overtime, all come from the same kind of public investment they now think the next generation is asking for too much of. That's how the infinity ladder works. We climb, we get a little higher, and then we forget somebody once held it steady for us. We tell a story where our grind is the whole explanation, and timing, policy, and other people's sacrifices are just background noise. But here's the thing. Whenever somebody at the top decides, I don't owe anyone else a step, whenever we pull a ladder up or refuse to hold it, that choice doesn't just sit still, it ripples.
I mean, I've probably told you this because it was my favorite thing that happened on The Departed, about a scene that I was not in, but he was. And the scene said, it was 1/8 of a page, and it said, Costello, which is the name of his character, Costello executes man kneeling in the marshes. Mm-hmm. Right? So you go, okay. Now, if you most people look at that and they'll go, all right, it's going to be one shot. You know, that's going to be an hour of work, and that's all I'm doing that day or whatever. He looked at that and he goes, okay, I can do that, but I think I can make it better. And so he's telling me this story. He goes, so what I do is, he goes, I come from the Roger Corman school, so I'm not going to add any time, and I'm not going to add to your budget. But instead of a man kneeling in the marshes, I make it a woman. And I go, oh, okay. And he goes, so I'm going to execute a woman, but I'm not going to be alone. I put Ray in the scene with me, and that's Ray Winston, who plays kind of his right-hand man, this brilliant English actor. And he goes, so I put Ray in the scene with me. And I do the thing, and I shoot her in the back of the head, like it says in the script. But if you leave the camera rolling, after she falls, I turn to Ray and I say, geez, she felt funny. Now that's a really sinister thing to say. Because it means I do this a lot and there's a way people fall.
Right.
And she didn't fall that way. And I go, oh, yeah, I get it, man. I get it. Because now you could end the scene there. But if you leave the camera rolling, Ray steps forward and he reveals that he's holding an axe. He's gonna chop her up.
Oh, man.
Now you could end the scene there. He goes, but if you leave the camera rolling, I turn to Ray and say, wait, I think I want to fuck her again. And he goes, now that's a very sinister line. And I go, I get it. It's really, really, really disturbing. And he says, now you could end the scene there. But if you keep the camera rolling, Ray stops and looks at me. And there's a pause. And I go, He goes, and that's a sinister thing to do because we're making a joke out of this whole thing. And I go, yeah, I get it. He goes, now you could end the scene there. But if you leave the camera rolling, God. Ray says, Francis, you really ought to see someone. And so that's what they did. He took this 1/8 of a page scene and he did all of that.
Yeah.
And they had 2 cameras on it so it could cut back and forth. And what Marty ended up cutting was he shoots her, she falls. He says, geez, she fell funny.
Right.
And Ray looks at him and says, Francis, you really ought to see someone.
Right.
Right. So, but he just gave him all of these options.
Right.
As dark and as sick as you want to go.
Yeah.
And he's playing a psychotic killer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just, that's what a great writer looks like.
We throw numbers around in this country like they're nothing. 40 million people lose something. 10 million people gain something. A shutdown lasts a few weeks. We say it like we're reading sports scores. Not that long ago, we watched a standoff in Washington where one of the hostages on the table was SNAP benefits, food stamps for roughly 40 million people that rely on that program, most of them working, most of them using it to close the gap between what they earn and what it costs to keep a kitchen alive. When we talk about that, we talk about it like the story ends there. 40 million people might miss food stamps, full stop. Outrage or indifference. Pick your reaction. Scroll to the next thing.
But if you leave the camera rolling,
the story doesn't end at the EBT card. 40 million people don't get SNAP. That's 40 million people buying less food. That means the local supermarket sales drop.
But if you leave the camera rolling,
margins are thin already, so the store orders less inventory, cuts a couple of part-time shifts, maybe doesn't renew a temporary worker they promised to see about after the holidays.
But if you leave the camera rolling,
the distributor that supplies that supermarket now has pallets sitting in a warehouse. Trucks are going out half full. Routes get consolidated. A driver loses a day. Another loses a route completely.
But if you leave the camera rolling,
the server who depended on EBT to stretch their own paycheck now has even less disposable income. So they're not eating out on their days off. Restaurant sales dip. That owner trims hours. One less line cook on Tuesday. One less server on Thursday. The dishwasher who was barely hanging on is gone.
But if you leave the camera rolling,
you're not just watching individuals struggle anymore. You're watching a neighborhood's immune system weaken. The landlord who was just barely willing to work with tenants stops being flexible. The person who used to give $20 to a cousin in trouble can't. The corner store that floated people for a week when things were tight can't. All from a decision made by people who will never miss a meal. We like to pretend these choices are isolated, that we can cancel subscriptions and skip prescriptions, and nothing else about the story changes. But the reality is, every time we decide someone else's survival is too expensive, we're not just cutting their lifeline. We're sending ripples through an ecosystem we also live in. And if the odds of your existence are already this wild, if you're already the lottery ticket that hit, maybe part of the responsibility of being here isn't understanding that your vote, your indifference, your it's not my problem doesn't just stop at your door. When we stop tending to each other, when we treat whole groups of people as acceptable losses, we're not just leaving them behind. We're letting the dust build up on everything. And that brings us naturally to the next part of this story. What happens when we stop cleaning? When I was a kid, my mother had this phrase she loved to repeat. Shaun, everything must be cleaned. She'd say it on Saturdays with clips or records from St. Vincent playing in the background. Windows open, sun coming in, and the whole house smelling like cleaning products and black motherhood. At 10, I thought she meant if you made a mess, clean it up. At 20, I thought she meant don't be nasty, wash your dishes. At 41, I realized my mother, without knowing the physics term, was describing entropy. Before your eyes roll in the back of your head, I'll get it there, don't worry. Entropy is just a fancy physics word for this. All systems trend toward disorder unless something or someone puts in effort to push them the other way. You can see it in the simplest places. You deep clean your apartment, go on vacation for 10 days, come back, and there is dust. You weren't even there. You didn't do anything wrong. The dust doesn't care. That's entropy. You stop calling a friend for a year. You didn't have a fight. You didn't fall out. But the relationship feels thinner, more fragile. That's entropy. You stop stretching, stop sleeping, start living on caffeine and vibes. Your body doesn't collapse overnight, but the little things start going wrong. That's entropy. There will always be people who want to be racist, people who want to hoard power, people who are perfectly fine with a world where some folks sleep in penthouses and others sleep under bridges. Entropy means that if we aren't constantly applying pressure in the other direction, they will always gain ground. Not because they're smarter, not because they're stronger, simply because neglect is their best teammate. Now I want to layer another metaphor on top of that. I call it the boatman. If you've ever seen a movie like Troy or anything based on Greek mythology, Gladiator, you name it, they all have this same image. When someone dies, the family places coins on their eyes. As a kid, I thought it was kind of creepy, but I was interested in why they did it. In Greek mythology, when you die, your soul has to cross the river Styx to reach the afterlife. And there's a boatman. His name is Charon. He ferries the souls across. The coins are his payment. No coins, no passage. You're stuck on the wrong side of the river. Now, whether you believe any of that spiritually is not the point. As a metaphor, it's perfect. Because in life, just like in myth, someone always has to pay the boatman. Every step you take is a small act of defiance against gravity. Your muscles are burning calories to pay the boatman so your body can move through the world. Every friendship that survives adulthood, jobs, kids, distance, depression, survives because somebody paid the boatman in time, phone calls, text messages. Yo, I'm pulling up on you, and let me know if you made it home okay. Every democracy that doesn't slide into open authoritarianism only does so because people keep paying the boatman in organizing, in voting, in showing up to meetings that feel boring and useless until the day they really, really aren't. And when we refuse to pay, when we pretend we can have clean water without maintenance, roads without taxes, community without investment, justice without accountability, we're not dodging the boatman. We're just handing him someone else's bill. We see it when we ignore infrastructure until a bridge collapses. We see it when we ignore climate warnings until the flood is at our door. We see it when we underfund schools for decades and then act shocked that kids are checking out, teachers are burnt out, and the pipeline leads more easily to prison than to a diploma. My mother's right. Everything must be cleaned. Not once, not when it's convenient, constantly. Entropy is patient. The boatman is patient. They will wait you out. You can pretend you don't see the dust. You can pretend the river isn't rising. You can pretend the coins on your eyes will be someone else's problem, but the bill is still running. That brings us to the last part of the story. What happens when, staring right at the cost, we decide to unsubscribe from reality itself? Back in episode 3, I talked about something I call the clean your chicken theory. This idea that the little things we do in our homes, the tiny rituals that feel harmless, are actually small deposits into a much bigger account we don't realize we're funding. When you wash chicken, not because it makes it safer, not because any food scientist told you it works, but because your mother did it, and her mother did it. And somewhere along the way, cleaning and rinsing raw meat in the sink became the same thing in your mind. You're not practicing food safety. You're practicing something else entirely. You're practicing bending reality when it makes you more comfortable. That's what it is. A belief system built on the comfort of a ritual, not the accuracy of the outcome. And the dangerous thing is, your brain rewards you for it. Do it enough and it becomes muscle memory, a way of protecting yourself from discomfort by picking the version of the world that asks the least of you. I really believe this. If you can unsubscribe from reality for something as harmless as how you wash your chicken, you can unsubscribe from reality anywhere. And eventually you will. Not because you're evil, not because you're malicious, but because it's easier than doing the emotional work required to admit you might be wrong. even about something small. And once you get used to that kind of comfort, you start building entire worldviews out of it. Worldviews that elect people, worldviews that set policy, worldviews that shape the systems we all must live inside of. And eventually those choices have consequences. I think about an Arkansas farmer who voted for the politician that promised them better trade deals, a stronger market, more money for real Americans. Government handouts were for the other people. They didn't want socialism. They just wanted the market to work. Then the policies hit. Tariffs, bad deals, climate disasters nobody planned for. The farm is struggling. The promised prosperity never comes. Suddenly that same farmer needs help from the very same safety nets they were happy to see shredded when they thought the cuts would only touch someone else. And if a bailout check shows up, they're going to cash it. I don't say it with judgment. I say it to point out the disconnect. You can't rail against the idea of a safety net in the abstract and then expect a trampoline just for you when you hit the ground. It's the clean your chicken theory scaled up. This isn't just a conservative thing either. On the liberal side, you've got people who swear they hate the influence of billionaires in politics, but will defend certain politicians no matter what, even when the donor lists and the voting records tell a very different story. Someone like Cory Booker is a great example. There are folks who will tell you with their whole chest they're against corporate money in politics, and in the same breath they'll tell you you're being divisive if you question the money he takes or the positions he softens. At some point, you can't claim to stand against the influence of billionaires while backing the politician who's still cashing billionaire checks. But millions of people do exactly that. Why? Because it's easier to cling to the feeling of who they want him to be than confront the reality of who he actually is. It's clean your chicken logic, applied to national politics. And then there's healthcare. We just came out of a shutdown where one of the loudest talking points was Democrats want to give healthcare to non-citizens. As if the great threat to American stability is a sick tourist or an undocumented worker getting antibiotics. I keep thinking about a trip I took maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I took my mother and my sister to Europe. We went to England and then to Paris. It was my mother's birthday week. While in Paris, we were walking back to the hotel one night. We had just had dinner. As we're crossing the entrance to the driveway, she trips over a speed bump and just face plants. I'm about 5 steps in front of my mother. She's walking next to my sister. I suddenly hear my mother say, "Oh God, I'm dead," with all the energy and drama of a Caribbean woman. I turn around just in time to see her fall face first. It happened in slow motion. It looked like when soldiers get shot in old war movies and they fall in slow motion. She hit the ground, her lip was busted. It began bleeding immediately. We get her inside. The hotel staff brings ice, they calm her down, and they tell us, "We're going to send a doctor to your room." Now I'm panicking a little because I know my insurance isn't going to work in Paris. And in America, if they send a doctor to your hotel room, you definitely have money. I definitely didn't have money. The next morning, the doctor shows up, checks my mom out, asks about her medical history, does his exam. I mentioned I probably need a prescription for something too. He and I chat back and forth on Google Translate because I didn't want my mom to know. And I also don't need you guys judging me. This is about 7 years ago. I was single and I was outside. I don't care. But he writes me a prescription as well. So to recap, doctor comes to the room, sees my mother, sees me, writes a prescription for both of us. The whole experience, about 180 US. On top of that, I took the receipt down to the front desk and they credited my card for the amount. Now, I'm sure some of you will say, "Shaun, great anecdote, but that's just one example." Now, while that may be true, I wasn't special. Anyone was in Paris and had the same situation. They're going to take care of you the same way. Now, maybe the hotel doesn't refund you, but the medical system will still treat you with humanity and dignity. And although I had to pay something, I certainly didn't go bankrupt from it. That was my experience as a tourist, a non-citizen, experiencing the kind of medical care some would call socialist like it's a slur. And I remember thinking, if this is what it looks like for me, a visitor, what does it look like for the people who actually live here? Meanwhile, in the US, we were told that giving basic health care to non-citizens was such an unacceptable idea, it was worth bringing the government to a standstill over. That's not just cruel, it's unsubscribing from reality. Because if the least of us has decent health care, the rest of us will, by definition, have good to great health care. If the weakest points in the chain get stronger, the whole chain gets stronger. Tourism cities make money off of visitors. I live in New York. We thrive because of tourism. Our economy depends on immigrant labor, locally and nationally. Viruses do not check passports. None of this is complicated, but the stories we tell ourselves are. Whether it's the Kentucky farmer, the Cory Booker supporter, the anti-immigrant crusader who is one bad fall away from learning what pre-existing condition really means. On the surface, they're different. Underneath, they're the same habit. They subscribe to reality when it agrees with the story they've already told themselves. And when it doesn't, they wash their chicken. I get why people do it. I really do. Most of us are exhausted. You work 8, 9, 10 hours. Commute. Try to keep your body from falling apart. Try to raise kids. Try not to drown in bills. Make time to do fucking laundry. Then somebody comes along and says, hey, can you also care about the climate, democracy, systemic racism, gun violence, and the healthcare system? It feels impossible, so people tap out. They decide, I'm just one person. Nothing I do matters. They opt out of voting, or they vote once every 8 years, based on vibes in a headline. They treat reality like Netflix. The subscription gets too heavy, so I'm going to cancel it. But here's the thing. Entropy doesn't pause while you rest. The dust keeps settling. The river keeps rising. The boatman keeps drifting closer. When we see something, say nothing, and do nothing, while we still have the ability to act, we are not neutral. We are choosing a side. They say if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think about that a lot, about how easy it is to see the world as something meant to be struck. Problems become nails. People become nails. Whole communities become nails. Something to hit, something to fix by force, not by care. But here's what we forget. Hammers build nothing alone. A hammer swings loud, but it's the nails that hold the world together. Quiet, unseen, thankless, but necessary nonetheless. They disappear into the beams, the bridges, the city blocks. They work buried inside the walls that keep us warm. No one applauds a nail. You only notice them when one is missing, when the step creaks, when the railing gives, when the whole structure groans under its own weight, because no one tended to the small things. And that's what unsubscribing from reality looks like. Not one big collapse, but a slow loosening, one missing nail at a time, one denial at a time, one that doesn't affect me at a time. Until one day the roof caves in, and everyone stands in the rain shocked, as if it weren't us who ignored the rot. Because the people who insist on swinging the hammer rarely imagine what happens when they become the nail. They preach consequences like it's theoretical, right up until life stops being hypothetical, and eventually, the bill comes due.
Ah! Oh, ouch! Ouch! Ouch, Charlie! Ow! Charlie, that really hurts. No, Charlie bit me. And that really hurt, Charlie, and it's still hurting.
Charlie Kirk once said, the loss of life in America was worth it to protect the Second Amendment. I doubt he ever thought his own life would be part of that equation. When he was shot, he was in the middle of answering a question about mass shootings in the last 10 years. His last words were, are you counting or not counting gang violence? He said it sitting under a tent that literally read, prove me wrong. The irony writes itself. Because if you've ever seen Charlie debate, you knew where he was headed, toward the same talking points about Chicago and Democrat-run cities, deflecting from the reality that most mass shootings in this country are carried out by white men. But before he could finish that pivot, the very culture he defended pulled the trigger. And I think about how improbable that is. How many things had to line up for Charlie Kirk to die this way, in a deep red state, surrounded by fans, at the hands of the very environment he insisted was safe enough to justify the cost of lives. It's a cruel kind of irony that should shake all of us a little. Reactions to his death fall into three camps. There are people like me, who remember Charlie saying he thought empathy was a made-up word. Every time I hear people say this, by the way, all words are made up, just anyway. But sympathy he could tolerate. So I have sympathy for his wife and kids. They lost a husband. They lost a father. That's real. But beyond that, I'm unmoved. Then there are those who have found some satisfaction in his death. And if that's you, you have to reckon with what that means. To feel good about a father and husband dying, not because he personally called for violence, but because you hated his words. I think that says something uncomfortable about where we've gotten in our discourse, where some of us seem somewhat gleeful by a person losing their life. And finally, there are his supporters, who are furious at his loss. To them, I'd ask, as angry as you are you finally ready to talk about the root causes, about income inequality, poverty, untreated mental health, and the fact that there are more than 400 million guns in circulation? Charlie spent years telling us the risk was worth it. Now he is the risk made real. And the questions that linger for all of us is this: are we going to treat his death as just another data point to argue over online, or as a warning sharp enough to finally make us reconsider the rules of the game we keep playing? Because if we can't learn from irony this sharp, if 6 episodes of holding up a mirror can't get us to see ourselves more clearly, then maybe nothing will move us. And if that's true, then the boatman isn't just coming for them, he's coming for all of us.
It's 5. Okay, now 5 is a lot, right? I'm gonna give you some credit. Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?
Counting or not counting gang violence?
Great.